Okay, we'll just wait a few more minutes. Let's see what we've got in the chat. I think folks are filling those out. We do appreciate you putting your name and the organization. Oh, and then we got a few suggested fruits that and vegetables that people are looking forward to. That's great. Apples, pumpkins, great. Well, definitely butternut squash. Broccoli, there's a favorite of some folks. So we're getting some good ones. Again, we appreciate everyone sharing there. Again, folks, appreciate you joining us, and we'll be starting here in just maybe 30 more seconds. We're asking folks to place their name and the organization they may be representing in the chat. And as you can see, folks are also sharing the fall fruit or vegetable that they're looking forward to since we're entering a new season here. Today is the first day being fall, for fall. Okay, well, it's 2:03. We definitely want to be respectful of everyone's time. We appreciate you joining us today. So let's go ahead and get started. My name is Michael Del Rosa, and I will be opening up our workshop today, and then we'll be handing off to the project team to carry you all through a productive discussion. Again, thank you for joining us this afternoon for the Food System and Circular Economy Working Group. I do want to quickly note that the meeting today is being recorded so we can share with others. That will be posted on our regional decarbonization website, and we'll be adding those for you as we move forward. Before we get into welcome remarks, I do want to note that we will be providing language translation for today's meeting. Please take a moment to find the interpretation tool on the Zoom menu bar. It looks like a globe. Everyone will need to choose the language you prefer to use to listen to this meeting. Please select the language, even if it's English. Let's take a moment to have everyone select their language. Now I'd like to introduce you to our interpreter, Giovanna. She's going to be explaining our Spanish and English language features that we have available for the workshop today. Giovanna, can you please come off of mute and tell everyone about these features?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Giovanna Wormsbecker, and I'll be your Spanish interpreter during this meeting. In order to provide language access, this meeting will have simultaneous interpretation from English to Spanish. Please note that the translation globe will not appear until after I've read through all language instructions. Therefore, we're asking that everyone joining us for this event, please select your preferred language to facilitate hearing presenters and participants clearly, and to prevent technical glitches or interference occurring between the two language channels when one is not selected. If you're on a laptop or a desktop, you will see a globe at the bottom right of your screen. Please click on the globe icon that says interpretation and select English. If you're on an iPad or a similar device, locate the three-dot menu on the upper right and select language interpretation, then select English. When it is your turn to speak, please remember to be loud and clear and speak at a moderate pace, as the interpreter will be interpreting simultaneously into the other language. Buenas tardes a todos, me llamo Giovanna Wormsbecker y voy a ser su intérprete en español durante esta reunión. Esta reunión contará con interpretación simultánea bidireccional de inglés al español. El globo de traducción no va a aparecer hasta que haya leído las instrucciones en los dos idiomas. Por lo tanto, pedimos a todos los presentes que seleccionen su idioma preferido para facilitar escuchar a los presentadores y los participantes. Si está utilizando una computadora, verá un icono en la parte inferior de la pantalla a la derecha en forma de globo que dice interpretación. Haga clic ahí y seleccione español. Si está utilizando un iPad o teléfono, localice el menú de 3 puntos que aparece arriba a la derecha. Haga clic en interpretación de idiomas y elija español. Cuando sea su turno de hablar, por favor, recuerde hablar con voz fuerte y clara y a un paso moderado, ya que el intérprete estará interpretando simultáneamente al otro idioma. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Giovanna. Great, let's have the translation team initiate the language channels and get started. We will be using a variety of methods to hear from you today. You will have the same features, whether you are joining from your computer or your cell. Please type in your thoughts using the chat features. This is located at the bottom of your screen. If you are joining by cell, select the 3 dots at the lower right of your screen. If you would like to speak over the audio, please use the raise your hand option, also located at the bottom of your screen. If you're calling in, please enter *9. We will be using these two features in addition to a virtual whiteboard. Additionally, we will pause in between our speakers to ask you questions and hear your thoughts. The majority of our time will be focused on hearing your comments and answering your questions the best we can. Here are those same Zoom features, but from a mobile view for anyone who may be joining from their mobile devices through the Zoom app. If you select More on the bottom taskbar in Zoom, you will see the options to chat. Select your language of choice and raise your hand to indicate you would like to speak. So again, my name is Michael Del Rosa, and good afternoon. I am part of the project team that the County of San Diego Land Use and Environment Group has formed to help move forward in developing the regional decarbonization framework. Today, you will hear from Murtaza Baksamusa, our program manager for regional sustainability from the Land Use and Environment Group, and Scott Anders, who is the director of the Energy Policy Initiative Center at the University of San Diego. I'd like to take a moment to just set the stage for how these working groups will be structured, where we are today with the framework, and how you will be able to continue to shape the implementation playbook. We have set up 5 special working groups to focus on key emitting sectors and solutions for addressing our changing climate. These will categorize and guide the development of the implementation playbook with a draft ready by the end of the year. Today, as we are working through the food system and circular economy sector, we would like to hear specific actions that can be included in the implementation playbook, such as specific plans, policies, or activities. Murtaza will give you more context on what we are looking for in a little bit. While working through the special topic working groups, we will be utilizing our engagement portal to facilitate these groups. Everyone should have received instructions on registering to the portal. If you haven't yet, please do so by going to the engagement portal link. We are sending the link in the chat now. This engagement portal will be the central area where all the workshop materials, documents, and notes will be uploaded. You can also see our meeting agendas there, as well as have the space to share ideas and ask questions. The RDF team will be monitoring the site, updating it within 24 hours of each meeting. Please do note you do have access to all the work groups that you have previously shown interest in from the interest form that you sent in. If you do not have access, or if you would like to be part of other special topic working groups, please feel free to email us at the zerocarbon@sandiego.ca.gov email. For today's agenda, Murtaza will be giving you all a quick recap of what the implementation playbook is and how you will help shape it. Then Scott will be giving some additional context on regional emissions. Then we will dive into 3 topics: waste reduction, methane capture and use, and sustainable agriculture. Here's where we would really like to open up the bulk of this discussion, hearing from you and getting your ideas. We have Rebecca from our RDF team who will be sharing her screen as we open these discussions, and we will be taking live notes. Please remember to speak clearly and slowly so that we make sure Rebecca can capture all your ideas. As we reach the end, we will be opening up the discussions for any topic that we may not have discussed, and then we will close the meeting. I do want to remind, we did ask folks, if you're just joining us right now, if you could please put your name and the organization you may be representing in the chat, that would be appreciated, so folks can see who's joining us. And with that, I will now be I will turn over the presentation to Murtaza to give us a quick background on the regional decarbonization framework.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you all for joining us. This is an exciting workshop. It's a new topic for us, food systems and circular economy. And if you don't know what circular economy is, we'll learn about it today. So my name is Murtaza Baksamusa. As Michael said, I'm the program manager for regional sustainability. And I wanted to give you a little bit of background on the integrated regional decarbonization framework, on what we've done so far and what our plans are for the future. So we're taking an integrated approach to the framework from study to action as we're transitioning to action. Today's workshop is about action. First, the technical report by UC San Diego and University of San Diego. This was the first study of its kind that scientifically established the strategies to eliminate carbon emissions or heat trapping gases from the atmosphere. The study analyzed that over half of emissions in the region in 2035 and beyond would still remain unaddressed, even if every local government implemented their respective climate action plans. The second is a workforce development study that accompanied it by inclusive economics. We have to make sure that these are high quality jobs of the future and to make sure that our current workforce isn't displaced. It explores ways in which actions to lower pollution from the region's industries can do so in what we call a high road way, where workforce policies are paired with climate ones. Both this workforce study and the technical report are complete and posted on our website and are available in county libraries. And third, an implementation playbook, which we are now beginning. We had previously referred to this as implementation pathways report. We will provide more details about it in the upcoming slides. Our organizing framework for individual and collective actions for getting to zero carbon emissions is going to be the implementation playbook. We're starting with best practices by learning from measures that governments and those individuals, businesses, and our indigenous communities have already adopted in various forms, such as climate action plans, sustainability plans, or just doing learning from experience. However, this is a playbook, not a plan. It does not have enforceable mandates or milestones. It will be a menu of options with plug and play strategies organized by 5 topics that we discussed. And it will be an accessible resource for all players, both in the public and private sector, to design, finance, and implement projects, programs, and policies. With the support of the University of San Diego's Energy Policy Initiative Center, the implementation playbook presented to the board in spring of next year will provide guidance at 3 levels. First, we will draw out actions that organizations, businesses, and governments can do on their own. Second, building up on those actions, we'll explore community-wide actions for local governments, tribal governments, as well as neighbors. And third, emissions know no boundaries. So we will identify actions from a regional perspective where we can gain efficiencies and greater outcomes for more collective impact. So today, as I mentioned, we are in this working group for food systems and the circular economy. We're looking for your ideas on actionable policies, programs, and projects for this implementation playbook. Through all the topics that the 3 common themes that we want your feedback on are important today in terms of what feedback we take back from an organizational level, from a business perspective, from a community perspective, as well as from a governmental perspective. Question is, what can we do? What are we doing today, and what can we do in the future? First question is, what works for you? What works based upon your own experience? Second, what are the impacts on underserved communities, particularly those that are disadvantaged historically, both in terms of positive and negative impacts? And third, what are we missing? Types of activities that are out there could include data collection and analysis, which includes research and development, implementation plans, financial incentives, policies, workforce training, education, outreach, as well as activities to implement and monitor progress. These questions will help us guide the conversation as we look into actions that we can include into playbook. We need your ideas on what is already out there and your ideas on what should be out there. So I'll hand it over to Scott Anders from the University of San Diego Energy Policy Initiative Centers to go over the topics for today.
Thanks, Murtaza, and thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Just going to provide kind of some high-level context to inform the discussions that we're going to have throughout the working group meeting. So first, just wanted to do a kind of a high-level overview of regional emissions. This slide shows the top 3 emitting categories. On-road transportation accounts for about half, electricity a little bit less than a quarter, and then natural gas a little over 10%. That totals about 80% of total emissions. And then the remaining emissions are made up of emissions from a bunch of different categories, including industrial gases, other fuels like wood and propane, off-road transportation, which also includes construction equipment, and solid waste at 2%, and then several other smaller categories that are 1% or less. And I should say that these emissions are kind of the direct emissions, or in the case of electricity, the emissions at the power plant, but these don't include what we sometimes call embodied or upstream carbon. So for example, in solid waste, we're looking at the methane that emits from decomposition of organic waste, but we're not looking at the embedded carbon in, say, a piece of wood or a computer or something like that. So that's something we're going to talk a little bit about today, but I just want to clarify that these emissions are kind of the direct activity-based emissions. So maybe to provide a little context for kind of the two topics of this, or the two connected topics of this working group, we'll talk, just wanted to give you a sense of what do we mean when we say circular economy. Circular economy is often defined in a way by contrasting against what's not a circular economy and what's sometimes called a linear economy, in which case it's a process of that they call take, make, use, and dispose. And at each point in this process, there is waste, and the waste is not necessarily reused or recycled or repurposed. On the other hand, a circular economy looks to make, use, collect, transform, reuse, and create a virtuous cycle of material reuse and revaluation. I guess kind of a natural analogy is like a forest, where nothing is really wasted in a forest. All of the materials are used for other purposes. And the other point, kind of the connected piece here, we're talking about food systems. And so a food system includes all processes and infrastructure in place to feed an entire population. From how food is produced and transported, contributes to regional emissions. But the food system is also an opportunity to reduce emissions in innovative ways. For example, growing and processing food uses energy, both natural gas and electricity, and electrifying some of these can reduce greenhouse gases in the building sector in agricultural production. Then food moves to a sorting distribution center outside the region, which adds to on-road transportation emissions from the food for the food from the farm to reach consumers, as opposed to locally sourced food and consumed food. And farms can produce their own electricity utilizing battery storage, or lease fallow, marginal, degraded lands to renewable energy production to reduce their energy costs and contribute to a greener grid and energy resilience. Through carbon farming practices, the process of growing food can capture carbon from the atmosphere and contribute to natural climate solutions. So that's just a few ways that so that's the circular economy and the food systems that we're going to be discussing today. And so to kind of compartmentalize a little bit this discussion, we've broken it up into three categories. The first is waste reduction, which is generally about waste diversion and recycling. So it's like, how do we reduce the amount of waste we actually send to the landfill? The second one is methane capture and use. So if there is waste disposed and it does create methane emissions, what do we do with that? And that's for landfills, wastewater treatment plants, and also livestock operations. And then finally, sustainable agriculture. So when just looking at some examples, and we'll get to some other examples as well, but these are things like agricultural easements, carbon farming practices, and urban gardens. So first topic is going to be waste reduction. And I'm just going to provide a couple slides here, and then we're going to move into the discussion. So just as a backdrop to the discussion, we wanted to provide some significant legislation that has been adopted in the state of California. SB 1383 requires 75% reduction of organic waste disposal by 2025. and it also requires at least 20% of currently disposed edible food to be recovered. AB 1826 also requires certain businesses to start recycling organic waste. Again, just a kind of higher level considerations backdrop for the discussion. If we do divert organic waste, it can be used in several ways. It can be used as compost. Those organic materials can be digested and turned into biomethane, which can be used to produce electricity, or used in some other way that natural gas or other gas might be used. And this diverted organic waste can also be used to create higher value products or to be reused. And so, for example, grain from beer making has been used to feed livestock and also to create other products. And we should also say that while there is a growing push for organic waste diversion, we're lagging in terms of the capacity to kind of deal with it. And so would love to hear your thoughts about that. So just to give you a sense of some examples of the kinds of things we're looking for in the discussion today, Murtaza mentioned the playbook is a list of specific actions that can be taken at various levels of scale. And so we just wanted to kind of give you a couple examples just to kind of give you some food for thought. But yeah, looking for your thoughts on many more similar kinds of examples. So on the organizational operations scale, we've seen local jurisdictions and businesses adopt zero waste plans for their own facilities and operations, and put in place policies or requirements for purchasing products with recycled content or that are compostable. At the community scale, this would be, for example, a local jurisdiction. We've also seen zero waste policies and plans adopted, but this would be for the entire city or county. And then at the community level, we've also seen policies adopted to require construction and demolition debris recycling. And then at the regional level, I mentioned the capacity to kind of accommodate these organic waste flows. That's something that really it exceeds the boundary of a city or county and may require kind of a regional discussion, and in fact is under regional discussion as we speak. And then developing programs to support diversion of edible foods, for example, could be done at the regional level. Just a couple examples, but in the discussion, we're really looking for specific actions or specific activities that can be taken by an organization, that can be taken or implemented at the community level and or at the regional level. So with that, Murtaza, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Scott. That was an excellent overview of waste reduction. And this is about all of us that are participating today. We want your ideas for action. So as Rebecca puts up the mural, I want to give a shout out to Rebecca Pell from our team. I want you to think of the question for this topic. What actions can governments, businesses, individuals do to reduce waste? We will be using this mural tool to receive your ideas by topic, but it will also help us in preparing the implementation playbook as well as to follow up with you. So we're capturing your notes as we go, and we would like to hear from you. You can come over audio or on chat, however you prefer. And I will open it up. I see some hands go up. If you can just put your hands up, that will make it easier for me to call you out. Michael will assist me in this process in case I miss anybody. So I'll just start with Joe. Go ahead, Joe.
Thank you. I want to propose that the county start a business incubator. Take a substantial piece of land, perhaps close down Montgomery Field, for example, and encourage new businesses to come, climate supportive in businesses, to come and set up operations, and perhaps anchor the incubator with a waste recycling specifically focused on things like battery recycling and electronic recycling that are almost not covered. I mean, they're clearly part of the circular economy, but they're not covered hardly anywhere in our country that I can see. So, you know, if we get the components of batteries, you know, the rare earths that are so important and rare and scarce, and recycle them, we could build a substantial business here and make it more effective in moving towards zero emissions.
Thank you, Joe. I'm going to call up Anthony just a second. I wanted to see if Scott can look at the question from Mary from the Farm Bureau about emissions, like what are the total emissions in terms of million metric tons for the region? If you want to answer it right now, Scott.
Yeah, Mary, it's a very good question. We gave you percentages, but not the absolute numbers. So thank you for calling us out. I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I believe that the 2016 regional inventory totaled about 26 million metric tons. I think that was the total, and that's approximately right. I mean, it used to be 29, but I'm pretty sure the 2016 is, but I'll look it up, and I'll also maybe drop in the chat the document from the SANDAG San Diego Forward Regional Plan. That's where the latest inventory lives.
Thank you, Scott. I'll call on Anthony. Go ahead, Anthony.
I'm not sure if you mean me, but this is Anthony Mann from Zero Footprint. I just posted some information in the chat that speaks towards the proposal that I'm putting forth, but basically it is to create a program to provide resources and team up with local farms and ranches to implement regenerative agriculture and carbon sequestration practices. And unlike a lot of other proposals along these lines, it does not relate to buying the produce or raising awareness around the produce, but instead a collective funding mechanism to actually change tens of thousands of acres and sequester hundreds of thousands of tons of carbon. Zero Footprint is the potential implementation partner for this kind of sequester local program in Sonoma County, where they have a scoping plan from the Carbon Cycle Institute to conduct carbon sequestration on 250,000 acres. And so I've uploaded this idea into the RDF engagement platform, and then I'm putting it in the chat here. And I also posted a picture of an excerpt from the Sonoma Climate Mobilization Strategy that outlines this specific proposal. I'm glad to talk offline about it too. There's much more detail than can be communicated here.
Anthony, if you can also email us, we'll put our email in the chat.
Thanks.
And particularly, this is about natural climate, natural resources, and is that what I mean? Is the focus primarily on how land use can sequester carbon?
It is, and it's just creating the funding and resources to accelerate that process through simple optional fee mechanisms. And so an example of that would be 1% from restaurants in San Diego generating $80 million a year for this effort.
Thank you. And I'll also encourage you to come to the land use workshop we have.
Definitely.
Important. Thank you.
Thanks.
I will ask, I think, Joe, your hand is a legacy hand, so I'll skip to Karen. Karen, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Karen Clay. I'm with I Love to Glean, and the purpose of our business is to collaborate with others in South County to build capacity for food recovery and redistribution. Currently, I'm chairing a meeting with Live Well San Diego Office of Equitable Communities for food insecurity in South County. And we'd like anybody that would like to join our group to get in touch with myself or with Alina, who's on this phone at the Colorwell as well.
Thank you, Karen.
You're welcome.
And if anybody is interested in the food systems work, also are here from our office. I mentioned Rebecca Pell is leading the work, so you can connect with her offline. I'll continue the list at this time. I'll go with B. B, you're next.
Hi, thank you. We're always here with the carbon sink farms. And yeah, just to like follow up a little bit with what Anthony was sharing, we feel that carbon farming and using as a natural climate solution intersects with a lot of topics that are interrelated. And we can like provide ideas and solutions by implementing incubator farms. We can increase the waste reduction by allowing farms to produce their own compost and have all the compost distribution locally, and like training for workforce and skills attainment in farming, the land use for food production, and having that local food production using regenerative practices that will guarantee the goals for mitigation and carbon sequestration in agricultural lands. And of course, all these, the co-benefit, the principal co-benefit is the food production for local equitable distribution.
Thank you. Appreciate that, dear. And looking again for action on waste reduction, if folks are thinking at an individual level, organizationally, or at a government level, what can we do? We would appreciate that to help us fill out the implementation playbook. I have, oh, okay. I have Carol next. Go ahead, Carol.
Hi, I have been talking with different cities about their implementation or their how they're dealing with SB 1383. And it seems like a lot of cities are trying their best, but I know in my own community, there's a lot of, in my own neighborhood, there's a lot of pushback of not even wanting to put their waste, their food waste in their recycling. So I believe that there needs to be some sort of coordinated education, and it could be on the community level, but it really would seem to be need to be regional, a coordinated education on food waste, not necessarily preventing food waste, but to deal with the food waste that we have on individuals.
Thank you, Carol. Appreciate that. It's about how we, at an individual level, address the environment around us. And it makes a difference because as we scale up, our policymakers take notice and they want to do the right thing as an organization. I'll ask if Victoria would like to speak next.
Yes, thank you so much. This is similar to what a few folks have already mentioned, but I think partnering with schools and community centers to host food to soil hubs across our region, because not a lot of low-income areas have access to these types of opportunities. And this could be a place where folks drop off their food waste, they learn how to compost, they connect with the environment, and they're able to make sustainable lifestyle choices as accessible as possible.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
Really appreciate that. We're making note of the suggestions. We're filling out the regional box quite a lot and appreciating that, and a lot of regional suggestions. I think that because this is so interconnected, the food system, it's and as our chair noted, we all have to eat, and then we realize that even like 40% of the food doesn't even make it to our table, and then what does make it to our table, a lot of it goes waste. So there is a kind of integrated approach needed here on the most effective utilization of food. I'll ask if Ellie is ready to go on the audio. Go ahead, Ellie.
Thank you. And I just put in the chat box the chapter Objective 7 of San Diego County Food Vision 2030, which is the objective is to scale up food waste prevention, recovery, and recycling initiatives in San Diego County with data and more specific strategies, but kind of on a high level, really just ensuring, and of course I have recommendations around food system issues all around food system, carbon farming, but I assume we're gonna go to those other sections. In terms of waste, just really making sure that we follow the pyramid of reduction, recovery, then recycling. With reduction, the key thing is behavior change. Culture shift is critical. So unified messaging using Save the Food San Diego messaging that's already been created seems like an interesting start. I would say it's a much bigger cultural issue, the cultural issue of consumption in this country. But so education, regional coordination around education, unified messaging. Secondly, investing in food recovery organizations that already exist, from, of course, the food banks, but also there's hundreds of small nonprofits working to collect edible food, and gleaners working in the fields. So it's really important to make sure these funding mechanisms are funding the work that's already on the ground. And then lastly, organics, regional coordination of organics recycling facilities, and of course, really developing regional compost markets that will help with the carbon farming side of the equation. And really, there is just no regional coordination. So I think if there's anything that can come out of this process is really a more unified regional strategy for all the build out of, the capacity on all levels, food recovery infrastructure, organics recycling infrastructure, composting market infrastructure. How can we coordinate across jurisdictions?
Thank you, Ellie. We will be discussing a little bit more on SB 1383 on the organic recycling law in the agriculture section, but I do want to also note that there has been a new law, AB 1985, adopted signed by the governor last week about organic waste, in essentially accelerating some of the organic waste product procurement targets. So the state is tightening the rules around this. So there's a lot of work here to be done. Before I call Mary, just give me a second. I wanted to just put the question that Anne Sharadian raised about under organizational, which is kind of like a little bit empty right now. The question is about whether it should be about developing a procurement policy for everything within like our business operations, or is it about the private business side adopting a procurement policy? So the way we're approaching this implementation playbook is that we want, under organizational operations, the policies that are, or organizational policies that are adopted to be usable by public or private sector. So if we do it for our facilities and our operations, in some ways we are setting the feasibility for others to follow along as well, and then to borrow from others what has successfully worked. So there could be examples of purchasing policies, and especially some of the large corporate procurement policies that we could learn from, and that's what we want to put in the organizational operations as well. So I hope that clarifies that. All right, I will move to Mary. Thank you for waiting. Mary from the Farm Bureau.
Actually, I'll put on the Farm Bureau hat when we get to carbon farming, but I wanted to talk about the waste reduction as the function of my business, AgriService first. And I've been composting now for 27 years. I've had 4 compost facilities that are medium to large scale compost facilities, and have recycled over 2 million tons of organics. And some of the I think Ellie really touched on it, the barriers to actually recycling is that, first of all, like Ellie said, we have to really look at that pyramid, and behavior change is the most important thing up front. Secondly, make sure that we're really looking at real numbers and how much organics are actually in the waste stream. And I think sometimes we get confused when at the sort at how much we're generating as far as food waste in our own homes, because the numbers kind of get commingled. And when we've done analysis of it, the majority of food waste is being done by food manufacturers, grocery stores. When we did some studies on grocery stores, we found that the majority by weight of actual food waste came from the deli, and it was the rinds of melons and things like that. It was predominantly the highest total, and it was not recyclable into that kind of food. But Ellie also touched on something that's really important, and that is how the state rules of 1383 and some of the other legislation has really disincentivized being able to have a regional approach. And these really are regional issues. And I don't know how to express this, but it would be great if there was some way for the region, when these laws are coming up, to be able to say, wait a minute, this fragments us. We know that there's a million tons of organics that are going into the landfill right now, or are already being composted. And yet I would venture to say that probably less than a third actually are going out to farms or for soil improvement. A lot of it's just being used around landfills for erosion control and things like that, since we've gotten rid of ADC. So we really haven't developed the markets and understood what it will take to develop the markets, and how much it really costs to process, transport, and spread compost. So, okay, that's my agri-service hat. Thank you very much.
That was very insightful. Thank you so much, Mary. We're making notes of it. There were a lot of rich ideas in there. We have a lot of value in our food and our waste, and that too, some of it could be upcycled. And it's not just about waste reduction, it's also about finding value for waste and life cycle emissions. So thank you so much. I know we kind of mentioned at one point the waste from the brewery industry that can be kind of reused, some of the spent grain, in terms of whether it's feed or whether it's construction materials. So this is also about upcycling, not just recycling. On the topic of recycling, it was brought to my attention there are at least 2 new laws on batteries and battery embedded products, SB 1215 and AB 2440, that have been signed into law, go into effect next year. So there'll be more extensive recycling and availability of recycling, hopefully, on electronics and batteries. Oh, Ellie says there's no such thing as waste. I agree. I'm running out of time. Is there any other on this topic? Sorry. Is there any other? Carol, do you have is that a legacy hand, or do you want to come on and, okay. All right. So with that, there's no more talk on waste reduction. Went to thank you, Rebecca, for that mural. We'll now switch over to methane, CH4. Go ahead, take it, Scott.
Okay, so great discussion. Thank you so much for all that rich feedback. Really appreciate it. So the first part was talking about diverting. Maybe you're right. We should stop saying waste materials from the landfill and reusing, upcycling. However, we can do that, using it for food. But once it is disposed, and if any organic matter is in, and by the way, there's still organic matter in the landfill. The question is, what do we do with that? And that's the typical metric that we're looking at in terms of emissions, when we're looking at like landfill or wastewater treatment. So this next section is really about, it's in the landfill already, or it's going in the near term, and it will create emissions. What do we do with that methane? So just again, similar formula here. We're going to talk about some laws, some considerations, and a couple examples. So from a regulatory standpoint, the state, the Air Resources Board has a landfill methane control measure regulation that covers, I think it's a function of how large and I think when it was put in place, but covers many of the open landfills and some of the closed landfills in San Diego. And then the Air Resources Board has developed the so-called short-lived climate pollutant strategy. And short-lived climate pollutants include things other than methane. But for our purposes today, we're going to kind of just use that as an example of something that the state is doing to deal with these short-lived climate pollutants, and again, focusing on methane. And then SP 1383 permits CARB to regulate livestock emissions after January 1st, 2024. So that's just another avenue for addressing the methane issue. That's slightly different from it being in the landfill, but the same principle, that the waste, the livestock manure emits methane as it decomposes. So a couple key considerations. I mentioned this idea of a short-lived climate pollutant. We really don't talk about long-lived climate pollutants, but if we did, that would be carbon dioxide. It stays in the atmosphere for a very long time, whereas methane and some of the other high global warming potential gases, they don't live in the atmosphere as long, but they have a much higher warming potential. So they actually heat the atmosphere up more, but they stay in the atmosphere a shorter amount of time. So if we can prevent them from going in, we can have an outsized impact on warming. There's a Ram Ramanathan, the famous climate scientist at Scripps, was kind of the pioneer of this way of thinking. And so it's definitely something to focus on. We're talking about capturing methane. We already have relatively high levels of methane capture at landfills and wastewater treatment. Doesn't mean there isn't room for improvement, but we're certainly not starting from zero. Generally speaking, there are a few dairies in San Diego region. I mean, I think objectively there are a few dairies, particularly and certainly in comparison to other parts of the state. And then I mentioned already, but even if we could divert all the organic waste from going into or organic materials, thank you for correcting us, going into the landfill, there's still already organic matter in the landfills decomposing now, and we also have an ongoing wastewater treatment flows that have some methane emissions associated as well. And just in terms of some examples, again, I think your examples were, I think, exactly what we're looking for, specific, targeted to these kinds of scales. And so just as an example for organizations, if in this case, if you're a landfill or a wastewater treatment plant owner, we can try to adopt a target of capturing as much methane as possible, 100% if possible. At the community scale, local jurisdictions can advocate for increased methane capture at landfills and wastewater treatment plants. We've seen that in climate action plans pretty frequently. And then on the regional level, we can conduct an analysis to look at methane emissions. There have been some interesting work done using satellite imagery to kind of determine, or even planes flying over to determine where the natural gas or the methane plumes are in a particular region. And then developing a methane reduction strategy and using kind of regional collaboration to get something like that moving. So anyway, just a few examples of what this looks like. And again, these are pulled in part, but mostly from climate action plans or similar.
Thank you, Scott, on that overview of methane capture and use. I like the word use. We want your ideas on actions for how we do methane capture and use. As Rebecca puts up the mural once again, I want you to think of this question, that given the potency of methane in causing global warming, it's got a potency of multiple times out of carbon dioxide in the short term, and pledges made to immediately reduce its emissions at a national level and at a state level. What actions can governments and businesses, that includes all of us users, but also the landfill operators, trash haulers. What can we do to reduce methane emitted into our atmosphere? We will be using this mural tool to get your feedback once again. And I want to remind you that as we're using this tool, we're documenting it so that we can use it for preparing the implementation playbook. And with that, I'll see if there's any hands raised. And if, feel free to come over audio or on the chat. And if you can raise your hands, it'll be easier for me to call on you to come over audio. We'll give it a second. I see. Is it Annie or is it Anne?
Either's fine.
Okay.
And
go ahead.
I did put it in the chat, but you said, yeah. So so I'm repeating, but just like we had under operational and organizational operations in the first mayoral board about a procurement policy, could we have a procurement policy addressing methane foods, high methane producing foods? I don't know what the right word is, but more climate friendly food procurement policy. So just a mirror of what we had before.
Yeah, could you give an example there that we could follow up on, or do you have a sample in mind?
Yeah, so two samples. So one is the Good Food Purchasing Program, which is a very broad and holistic procurement policy that looks at lots of different things. But one of those is, the environmental footprint of specific foods. And then another program would be Greener by Default, which is about specifically how to set up menus so that, emphasizing more plant-based or climate-friendly food options. And it's very behavioral economics kind of policy. But yeah, those are two off the top of my head.
Thank you. That's very instructive. We're making notes. And if you have any follow-up documents or anything, feel free to just email us or post on the Engage website. Before I go to you, Ellie, I wanted to ask if somebody from our team, perhaps, do you want to come on, Elise? Do you want to talk about how methane is being currently used and proposed uses?
Sure. So methane is currently captured in a number of facilities, including wastewater treatment plants. And then that methane can be kind of cleaned of the additional molecules and compounds that are in it, and then can be utilized to power the production at on site. So that's one current use of methane that gets captured from wastewater treatment plants or landfills. And I'm not too sure what kind of other proposed uses might be, but we are certainly welcome to any examples that anyone might have.
Thank you. Thank you, Elise. Elise from our team, she's a co-author of the land use chapter and part of our team at the Office of Sustainability and Environment Justice on this framework. Okay, I'll ask Ellie, go ahead.
Thank you. I don't have a ton of additional ideas for this section, and also don't want to play a huge devil's advocate or anything, but I do want to sort of point out that perhaps not all these ideas and strategies are really transformational strategies. This one feels a little bit more like, it's more like a Band-Aid. It's more like a Band-Aid for the current symptoms, and how do we sort of make good of the current wounds, if you will. And so I suppose in terms of sort of prioritizing the strategies, there is an element of let's put a Band-Aid on it, but then also I think making sure we don't just jump to what feels like the easiest thing off the checklist, because often what I see in the state is they want to invest a lot in infrastructure. because it's just very tangible, it's long lasting. They say, oh, it's got to be a 10-year investment if we're going to invest in it. But that's really not going to lead to the transformational change to get out of this mess. We're going to have to invest in some fuzzier culture shift type of things. So for us, this is a more visionary space. So for us to be mindful of those tendencies that we often tend to want to just like check things off because it's easy and it's tangible. And we can say we did it.
Thank you, Ellen. That's the North Star, what you just raised out. We got to do things. Sometimes we do things that are difficult because then, you know, we need to do it. This is the reason why we have this framework. We're not just doing it because we're required to. And so we need to look for those transformational items. The scale and urgency of addressing the climate emergency cannot be achieved by just continuing on the trajectory of the past. So thank you so much for that. The topic here, or rather the subtopic here about methane capture and use, it's come up a couple of times in our board meetings, and particularly in the context of workforce issues in trying to see if there can be a way to generate high quality jobs with the methane. And that is kind of even if it is a band-aid, if it's just a band-aid we keep ripping off and putting it back on, it's still something that we got to keep pursuing because we still have landfills that are still emitting methane. So I'll see if there's any other comment on this topic, on methane capture and use. Okay, if there isn't, I don't actually have any follow-up on the methane issue, because I know the next topic that's coming up is pretty expensive and substantive, and I know a lot of folks are here for this particular topic. I will thank you, Rebecca. We can turn this one off, and now we will turn it to sustainable agriculture. Back to you, Scott.
Great, thanks, Murtaza. So we'll wait to get that. Okay, so we're gonna get into the final discussion topic here, sustainable agriculture. This is kind of a broad category that's gonna cover a couple different topics, but we kind of put them all together to to address this issue around agriculture and food production and other things. So just looking at some state laws, SB 27 led to the National Working Lands Climate Smart Strategy, shown there on the right. The Executive Order N8220 is the so-called 30 by 30 initiative to conserve 30% of the land and coastal waterways by the year 2030. And the reason that we included this is because there is a potential for conserving farmland, for example, or using. So there's an agricultural tie-in here. That's why we want to include that. The state has programs like the Healthy Soils Program, which finances incentives. It provides financial incentives to implement strategies to remove and store carbon, so kind of carbon farming type approaches. And then the Farm Bill that is being considered, I think, also has some of these kinds of measures in there as well. But just some activity going on. Would love to hear other thoughts if you have them about other key laws and programs that are worth mentioning. So just again, kind of key broad context. That in San Diego, the farming community is characterized by many small farms, and represents a relatively small proportion of regional emissions. Again, I mentioned at the beginning that we're talking here about the direct emissions, if you will, and there could be more emissions in you know, in a pound of food that comes from Argentina than a pound of food that comes from Valley Center. And we're not including those, but, you know, just important to make that distinction. And then looking at it kind of broader from a food, kind of a food systems perspective, that most of the food, or I would say most of the food consumed in San Diego region was produced elsewhere and transported. There's an energy and a climate impact of that. So the food we get has sort of carbon embedded or embodied in it. And there's energy required at all points in the supply chain, which we kind of mentioned at the earlier part, from production to processing to shipping and in fact, disposal, right? So energy is required at all points in that process. And then on the flip side, locally produced food could require less energy and have lower emissions. And then as examples, you know, we talked about the breweries and the spent grain could be used for animal feed. It could be used for human food. There was an example in the presentation of like a little bar that was produced from spent grain. Also, Murtaza mentioned construction materials, kind of higher value materials that can be used, can be produced using these spent grains. We can also, there was mention about a purchasing policy. So having some kind of a purchasing policy that prefers locally produced foods. On the community side, we've seen in the climate action plans measures and actions that support urban gardens and programs to encourage preservation of agricultural lands. And at the regional scale, these are suggestions, but you know, analyzing the potential for carbon farming. I know there have been some studies done, but you know, really trying to quantify and kind of think through the how we could implement those sorts of things. And I think that was a comment I made earlier. I'd love to hear more about that. And then developing programs to promote best practices in things like carbon farming. So these are just, again, some examples, but you all are really giving us some really great input and feedback, very specific. So we really appreciate it. So Murtaza, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Scott. So for that overview of the agriculture, sustainable, climate smart agriculture, sustainable agriculture that we want your feedback on. I want to mention before we move on to the discussion, there are a lot of efforts done in the past, and I want to acknowledge that, and also a lot that are currently being done to encourage this kind of food system movement within the county. That includes our county's food donation action plan in 2018 and the State of the Food System report in 2019. And also the development of food vision 2030 that Ali mentioned from the San Diego Food System Alliance and many other stakeholders. So we're looking to work with you all to craft these strategies together so that we can have them in the playbook and that can be used as a resource by all stakeholders in the region. Now, as Rebecca puts up the mural, I want you to think of the question for this particular topic: what actions can we take in getting to zero carbon in agriculture? Once again, we'll be using this mural tool to receive the feedback and organize the input that we receive into the implementation playbook. With that, I see a couple of people put their hands. I'll just remind you that you can use the chat or raise hand feature so I can call you on audio. And also feel free to follow up on email with any supporting documents so that we can actually attach the specific proposals with examples and samples for tried and tested strategies. All right, with that, Anthony, go ahead. Thank you for your patience, and no problem at all. I don't think you weren't paying attention at that time on the way. It's good to see you back.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry about that. So first, in response to the question about other laws and legislation, 6 days ago, AB 1757 was passed, which establishes natural climate solutions targets in 2030, et cetera. Definitely, I think that's critical and kind of first of its kind nationwide and globally, maybe even. And then I appreciate that kind of developing, programs for best practices in carbon farming is kind of one of the ideas. And I really want to just focus heavily on the funding for that. and suggest that the county really hone in on not just sort of like creating programs in theory, but generating sources of funding for that transition work to take place. There's some, I guess, stats from like the USDA's EQIP program or Conservation Stewardship Program that suggests that in 2021, 100,000 farmers were denied funding for conservation grants. So many, many farmers want to improve resilience, do all this work. There's not money. And I also understand that money may not be available in government budgets. And so all of the work that we do is in generating funding a couple cents at a time from consumers to create millions of dollars to fund this transition and accomplish county goals. Very interested in collaboration on that. And then the last thing I'll note is just, there was kind of this mention of like the embodied emissions, the food from Argentina versus locally, et cetera. And overall, that logic is, in my opinion, humbly, a little bit outdated because it fails to consider the opportunity cost overall of the acreage. And so I'm popping in again the stat from the San Diego Food Systems report on carbon farming, outlining the potential to sequester 234,000 tons per year of CO2. And so it's not about local, et cetera, because oftentimes the emissions of transportation of food is like 3% of the carbon footprint. It's not even about the fertilizer or the plowing associated with the actual production of the spinach or the carrot. It's all about the potential of the land to sequester many, many tons of carbon, way more than the food emissions themselves.
Thank you, Anthony. So many different points we want to go into. That is very critical that farmers actually utilize the incentives and make sure that they're compensated. Just want to point out the Inflation Reduction Act has almost $20 billion in agriculture conservation. We need to make sure that our small farmers in our county can help them avail of these opportunities. And we want to partner to help make that happen. And with that, I'll turn it, there are a couple of other folks waiting in the queue. Do you want to go next, B?
Just echo what has been said, and we sound like a broken record, but really make these incentive like programs that they can help our farmers, can help mitigate our significant carbon footprint and get us to net zero faster. And this strategy needs to be the central strategy to make the right investments in these regenerative practices.
Thank you, B. I just want to kind of read off some of the comments here in the chat before I come to you. Elise, wait, is that Elise? Okay. And just a sec, give me a second. I'm trying to catch up with all the comments that are coming in on this. And I see you, Ellie, that point about voluntary incentives for farmers is a way to do this with minimal reporting. Oftentimes, especially in terms of carbon farming, it's hard to quantify and avail, especially when you're a small farmer, to avail of those kind of investment opportunities. Joel points out a crop swap program for a carbon sink for orchards. It's a pretty good point. We also want to think about like how does, for our region, horticulture, floriculture plays an important role. I see Joel has said that activate fallow public lands by making them accessible to producers with contracts that require carbon farming practices. So it's serving a dual purpose of both utilizing land, capturing carbon in the soil, and sequestering it at the same time, utilizing it for food production. And see a couple other, Anthony put in a couple more points. Thank you so much, Anthony. All right, Anne, I'll go to you next. Go ahead.
Actually, I was just going to say most of what Anthony just said and suggest in terms of the transportation not being like the biggest factor. And so maybe consider changing, a preference to purchase locally produced food to, low carbon food or however, but just considering like the whole life cycle of the food, the embedded emissions. And I know that's hard. I mean, it's much easier to like be like, okay, this food is from Argentina versus San Diego. That's easy. But if it's not going to have the impact, that we want, then we want a better policy, I think.
Of course, thank you. I think that's also a very complicated question in today's kind of produced food, most of processed food, I would say. When food is transported around the world, a couple of times before it actually comes to the grocery store on the shelf, I know that Unilever and some other major companies are trying to trace the origin and to give a carbon value. I think it's being tried in some other countries as to when you pick something up from the shelf, then what is the disclosure or reporting on the carbon impact. It's once again, I think that's where the private sector is taking the lead on this because they know their supply chains. It's very difficult for a governmental entity to track that. All right, I'll come to you next, Mary, if you're ready.
Thank you so much. This is with the Farm Bureau hat on. So I'm also an avocado grower. And I think one of the things that we could really look at is to do a robust analysis of why there's been 1 million trees taken out of California farming, or sorry, San Diego farming over the past decade. So one of the things that we need to understand is what are the barriers, and how can we overcome those barriers? So I know that there's a lot of numbers around, but on how much subtropical evergreen trees can sequester, but looking at 2 tons per acre is a pretty reasonable number. And one of the things that I think we've lost is so much acreage that we're losing this capacity to sequester carbon. So at the moment, there's 27,000 acres of avocados and citrus in San Diego County. And I think that, which is 54,000 tons of carbon sequestration. Looking for ways of increasing that and producing food at the same time. When we talk about planting trees that produce food, I think local food is an added bonus. And so being able to come up with a way of helping new farmers get involved and overcoming these barriers would be great. And if we could do it again, as we talked about earlier, on a regional basis, I think that would be great. And then the other point I wanted to make about the carbon sequestration on rangeland is that when we talk about subsidies, I don't personally like the subsidies. I think that when we talk about organic waste, it should really be viewed as producer responsibility. And so if there's 1 million tons of organic waste that could be used in the county and turned into a useful product like compost or composted mulch, that we charge the appropriate amount as a tipping fee to cover the cost of processing, transportation, and application for the agricultural land. And sometimes there's a misunderstanding about the value. And so while we know that there's a value in the sequestration, especially on rangeland, of which we do have 100,000 acres, the income per acre is generally in the neighborhood of $25 to $50 per acre. And so there's no way a farmer is going to spend $2,000 per acre to spread compost or mulch. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mary.
Oh, and I calculated that out to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $90 to $100 a ton for processing organic waste into compost and then trucking it and spreading it.
Well, thank you. You have a lot of, we'll follow up with you on this, Mary. There's a lot of information here and very valuable feedback. I want to very quickly cover some of the questions and comments in the chat. Let me start with Ellie Brown. Local purchasing also meets the purpose of culture shift. So Ellie's talking about the food procurement and how we buy local as a culture shift. And part of it is awareness, and part of it is education that this is better. Why is it better? I'll move on to B's comment. Carbon storage says water holding capacity. Healthy soils are vital infrastructure. Yeah, this is kind of important that what was called dirt is actually kind of vital to the earth itself. The black stuff is actually carbon. It's what keeps our planet healthy. Laurie's comment, she agrees with the agroforestry from suggestion from Mary, kind of teeing up side by side. Let's look at agriculture. Let's look at how we can use trees. And Laurie, you can, if you would want, you can always jump on and expand on these comments, because there's also a lot of information here, both relevant to urban agriculture, but also relevant to the land use and natural resources, which is the other companion piece we're looking at on decarbonization.
Okay, were you talking to me, Laurie?
Yeah, sure. Do you want to come on and talk about it?
Okay, well, yes, trees in general have, in their life cycle, benefits to this whole issue. And when they're alive, they sequester carbon and have all other kinds of eco benefits as well. And not to mention they provide shade, which reduces air conditioning demands, which reduces the need for, electricity and gas to run air conditioning, et cetera, et cetera. And then when they're at end of life, if the wood part of the tree is not repurposed in some way, it will turn back into greenhouse gas. And so it's only a temporary storage unit for carbon. But there are possibilities to upcycle every piece of a tree. And in our county, we have thousands of end-of-life trees because we have millions of trees, and trees don't last forever. And so we have a huge supply of such material. We have modest reprocessing capabilities of that material, and we have low economic demand for that material. If we want to create a circular economy, which we can, I mean, it's theoretically certainly doable. We have to vastly increase demand and increase processing capability to some degree to utilize all the supply of dead tree material. But of all the pieces of the tree that are most valuable economically, it's the wood, and particularly the bigger pieces of wood. And parenthetically, not only does tree matter turn into greenhouse gas, the wood turn into carbon, if it's buried in landfill or in a yard, essentially buried anywhere, it turns into methane gas, not carbon. So that's kind of a holistic view of trees and how we could much better capitalize on it, including planting more, as was mentioned by the previous person, which Fantastic.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Lori. And you know, some of the work you're doing around green infrastructure, and we'll be covering that on other topics, but if you have anything to add, you can feel free to cover it in the next section, which will be the open discussion section. Right now we're talking about sustainable agriculture. So I know also, Amy, you posted a long comment. If you feel you can jump on the queue and tell us, or I'll read through it. So in the meantime, is there anybody else on sustainable agriculture? Okay, I'll try to capture Amy's comment. It's a bit long. So it's building up on what Ellie talked about how we fund it, and some of the discussion that was about, like, why are we putting so much burden on farmers to try to who are already overworked in terms of what they're trying to do. Their core work is tilling the land to grow the food and not go and measure carbon. This is it's about how do we explore creation of regional stakeholder group that can then create that kind of a platform to meet some of these kind of grander challenges. So some of these exercises are, it's like who will bell the cat kind of situation, where we are all working in our own different worlds. We all have specializations, authority, jurisdiction, funding, etc. We're trying to do run our own enterprise. Who is looking at the big picture? The time for the horizons are too long, and for traditional, I guess we see, you mean venture capital and private equity funding cycles, and the patience in getting return to that money is of a different scale. So therefore, the traditional philanthropic sector represents a sizable reservoir of capital focused on social change. The ability to generate leverage is an area of weakness and source of great frustration for donors. So funding solutions are grand challenges and require a level of risk that may be uncomfortable for individual philanthropists to take on alone. This is where some kind of a collaborative of funders, I think, would make a difference in terms of how do they invest in this kind of effort. Well, once again, philanthropy is one slice of the pie. Amy, I'm paraphrasing what you're saying. One slice of the pie, it needs to have the concurrence of the financing sector. How do you get the loan and loan terms to use that kind of land that you have, or you rent, or your tenant for, in order to have productive climate related activity that will pay back the loan. But at the same time, like angel investors or venture capitalists that can take the risk. What is the role of government and incentives here in terms of kind of being that kind of a layer in the stack of capital that is needed to make all this work? And so anyway, these are great suggestions. I think there's a lot to follow up here in the agriculture sector, particularly in terms of making the economics work. I think we heard that with the demand on land and the price of land going up exponentially, it is extremely difficult to run that kind of a business operation with the small farms, the largest small farming community in the entire country that we have here. So in San Diego. So it's something we're paying attention to. We want to elevate initiatives and solutions that particularly make agriculture feasible. All right, I'll keep moving on this topic. If there is no other comment on the sustainable agriculture section, I'll just one last call for that. Okay, if there isn't, then I want to open up the discussion. I'll have Rebecca keep this mural up, and if Rebecca, you can go to the big, we don't call it parking lot. You like to call it a bike rack, make it a little less carbon impact. So the bike rack is where you can put in things that we can come back to and that we didn't cover today, but we will come back to it. And we would like your thoughts on topics we did not cover today. I'll give you a moment to think it over. While I know Mary, it looks like you have a legacy hand up, but if you would like to come on the audio.
It was a legacy hand, even though I always have something to say for
maybe, okay, just think a little bit about it. There's so much of collaboration here that we all are looking forward to. If you have any ideas, we would appreciate that. Ellie, you too have a lot of comments. If you want, you can come on the audio.
Just kind of, I guess, piggybacking on Ami's point. Sorry, I didn't say that right. But just, you know, how things are resourced, how things are implemented on the ground, who's benefiting, who's not benefiting. Like all these things require really being closely engaged in on the ground, and also require very like fast feedback loops and not this kind of traditional like linear approach of like, let's create a you know, multi-year plan and let's, you know, evaluate at the end of many years, because this issue is urgent and things are shifting very dynamically. So how can we be more agile, experimental? How can we organize ourselves so that we are really allowing for that emergence and innovation rather than creating bureaucratic processes that really won't meet the needs of our time? So just kind of super high level thoughts, but.
Thank you, Ellie, for the super high level work too. And at the same time, if you do have any thoughts later on specific actions, activities, examples that could be useful, you already done a lot, and appreciate that with the food vision. Any other thoughts from topics we've not covered, actions that we could take on food systems and the circular economy?
Mirza Anthony has his hand up.
Oh, go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, sorry, I thought I would just verbalize something I put in the chat, but basically I want to add a +1 and strengthen Mary's comment about sort of the importance of incorporating funding for the transportation and application of compost in relation to SB 1383. Typically, the purchase of compost might be like $25 for a ton, anecdotally something, and then the transportation and application might be 50 or 70, whatever. And so, you know, I think the county, maybe including like unincorporated or all cities and unincorporated, will be procuring, you know, maybe something like 150,000 tons of compost per year, all in between all the different jurisdictions. And so if each jurisdiction and all these different things basically only budget for the purchase and not for the transportation and application, then that's like a massive, massive missed opportunity for carbon sequestration in the region. The issue, of course, is that to transport that 150,000 tons of compost might cost, you know, $7 million or something. And so again, it always gets back to me to the funding. How do we generate the funding to accomplish the county's goals on carbon sequestration and align all these efforts that are already going to be underway by law and optimize the outcomes from that?
Thank you, Anthony. As folks are thinking, if there's any other thoughts remaining, I wanted to put on your radar a zero waste equity grant program that has been authorized by the legislation as a competitive grant program next year to support targeted strategies and investment in communities transitioning to a circular economy, particularly focused on disadvantaged communities, and the state is looking for ways to increase job opportunities and improve labor standards and worker pay related to zero waste job sector. That I'll pause, see if there's any other comments. was a great discussion, very lively, lots of great ideas. I almost like Rebecca almost ran out of space in the number of suggestions you had. So I really appreciate it. I'll give it one more last call for any questions. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. And I just wanted to remind us that with the passage of the Climate Crisis Act at the state level, it will establish a clear, legally binding and achievable goal for California to achieve a statewide carbon neutrality goal as soon as possible, but no later than 2045. And it would establish an 85% reduction of emissions goal as part of that 2045 timeline. So yes, the state is moving in that direction. We are somewhat ahead of that in planning on how do we regionally coordinate amongst our different jurisdictions. We are blessed in that we have this kind of an ecosystem of key players that are often working together on multiple tables. So we can pursue on these 5 different sectors collaboratively. Vanessa asked if I can explain that. I can just give you the bill number right now and then we can follow up. It's Assembly Bill 1857. And it is defined in state law now. Okay, all right. If there's no more questions, there's no more, I'll turn it over back to Michael for closing.
Thanks, Mirza. That was a great session, everyone. Really appreciate all the input and the specifics that we got. Just some real quick closing notes. We want to be mindful of everyone's time. Again, thanks for joining us. We wanted to just make sure that everyone knows that we're going to be posting the notes from this workshop and the recording on the special working group portal. So please check back there for any additional resources and material. We also want to let you know that the next working group for the food systems and circular economy is on October 25th. So please be sure to register for that if you haven't already. In addition, we just wanted to mention that our next special topic working group will be actually held next Tuesday, September 27th on transportation. So if you're interested in that topic as well and you're not already registered, please register for that one. And then again, just please feel free, if there's any follow-up on the specifics or any other informational item that you want to share with us, please, we're encouraging you to do, we really love for you to do that, encourage you to do that. And you can post your questions on the portal site as well. And we look forward to seeing you all again. And thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us. And please have a great afternoon and take care.
Thank you all. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.